I will be forever the myth.
You're the king of kings, man.
There's always a pecking order. The little packers never mess with the big packers. So I'm a rooster, and he's a chicken, so to speak.
All right, well, let's go to the Lee Haney years. So this was from 1984 to 1991. And Lee Haney came in. His first Mr. Olympia was 83, where he took third. But then in 84, he was so much improved that he just dominated. So now this was the first time, I guess, since Arnold, where we had a guy who was a big guy, but he was just such a great bodybuilder. He was so dominant that nobody could touch him. And he beat Arnold's record, and he won it 8 times in a row.
Right.
But it was just a genetic freak. So now they talk about when bodybuilding got big, when it turned the corner, and it was just all about size. But I don't think, Lee Haney was big, but he was more than just big. He had great symmetry because he had that super small waist.
Right.
Plus he put it all together. He had really no weak points. His posing was really good. It showed off his physique really well. He was always in shape. He had great stage presence. He was always smiling, so he was really a complete bodybuilder from head to toe, and he had all the aspects of a great bodybuilder,
Right. Well, I covered the latter years of, let's say, the reign of Lee Haney. I was out of the Coast, and, I could tell you, I don't know if it's reflected in the magazines back then, but Lee was very dominant.
Yes.
For the last couple of years of his, let's say, Mr. Olympia reign, he was considered almost unbeatable. I remember
pretty much every year, right, Jer?
Yeah, every year. Well,
every year he won.
In '87 in Gothenburg, Sweden, when he won, I was there. In fact, I remember they put me at a hotel away from everyone. I don't know why, and I happened to be in the same hotel as Lee, and we had breakfast a couple of times together. We went to the gym together, but I remember that you could see that everybody already assumed that he was winning.
Yeah.
In other words, the other guys hoped to place high, but nobody really believed they were going to beat Haney.
Yeah.
I think I told you the story when I went to a local gym there in Gothenburg with Lee. We went to take, Lee wasn't going to train. He went to use the tanning bed, believe it or not.
Right.
But I wanted to get a workout in, and it just happens that all the Mr. Olympia competitors were training in the gym that day when we walked in.
Yeah.
And it was just like something. I'm going to get this. It was like something out of a movie because they're all working out and talking and this and that. And Lee steps in the doorway, and I'm right behind him. And suddenly there's complete silence. all the bodybuilders turned towards Lee. And he said, "How you guys doing?" And he walked by them, went into whatever it was, the tanning room. It was a really funny scene how they all stopped. Like here's the king entering. We got to give him some respect.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think. There might have been a couple of years, maybe in 1990 when they drug tested it. He wasn't at his best that year. So maybe you could argue that maybe 1 or 2 guys could have beat him that year.
Well, that was the year that I think I told you. Lee Librata beat him in the prejudging.
Yeah.
He actually beat him that year.
And I think the year before, too, in Rimini, Italy, when he was a little heavy, I think that year. But I don't know. I look at the pictures of him. He's just his structure, he's just, as good as Librata was, in Italy, he was twice as size, It was just, you could see why he would win every year,
Yeah. Well, that's it. Here we go again. A Librata, just a great, definitely one of the uncrowned Mr. Olympias.
Yeah.
Great. Lee is still in fantastic shape. He's got to be in his 60s or something. He was in great shape every time, had a complete body, just like Chris and Samir, but he was a smaller man compared to Lee. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, in other words, it's a question where if Lee Librata, as it was in 90, was in better condition than Lee, he still loses to Lee because Lee was just a bigger man.
Yeah.
So that's the way it worked. Unfortunately, that's the way it worked,
All right. Well, after the Lee Haney years, we go to, and another thing I want to mention too, they always think that they would always give it to the incumbent Mr. Olympia, and I think that grew more after Lee Haney's years. But like I said, with Lee, I think he kind of deserved it. So it wasn't like where Arnold, I don't know, maybe like 72, Arnold could have lost, but it was almost like the same thing with Arnold. Like,
Yeah.
and I don't know why the judges or the federation felt like that was important. I think like the way they do it today, we were talking about this earlier. Now they take it away from the guy. If he doesn't deserve it, he'll lose, and then somebody else will win, and then the guy might be able to win it back, like Jay Cutler did again.
Right.
So it's way more exciting. And I
Yeah.
think it would have been more exciting back then too. Can you imagine if Arnold would have lost in 72, the
Yeah.
fight they would have had in 73? Because Sergio
Right.
definitely would have came back in 73 if he
Yeah.
would have won it in 72,
Absolutely.
Or, it's just there's a lot of great scenarios of what it could have been.
Yeah.
But I think, like I said, with Lee, I think he deserved every title. So, I mean, but he did win an 8 in a row, and then it seemed like every guy after him, they would win it until they retired. And I think even Shawn Rhoden once, when he was losing to Dorian, he said, once the guy's Mr. Olympia, he could come out in a wheelchair, and they're still going to give it to him, because it doesn't matter, because he's the incumbent Mr. Olympia. He's not.
I asked Shawn about that, my theory about he totally agreed with me.
Yeah.
He says, he's the guy who's considered the winner unless somebody steps up or unless Mr. Olympia is a little bit out of shape, noticeably, not a little like Arnold was, noticeably out of shape, and the other guys are in great shape or improve, then he loses. But if he, let's say, maintains his winning look, so to speak, and gets just a little bit better, he wins.
Even if he's not better, I mean, they always had that stupid saying, you got to knock the champ out, which
Right.
This isn't boxing. You shouldn't have to knock him out. If he deserves to lose, he deserves to lose, right?
Right. I know it's stupid, but it's something that's been passed on. It's like eating egg whites. Bodybuilders think you need to eat. And when you say to them, why are you eating egg whites? Well, because everybody else eats egg whites.
Yeah.
Nobody ever questioned it. It's the same thing. You
Right,
got to the champ. Nobody ever really thinks about why that's true.
Yeah.
So
that is one of the improvements with the Mr. Olympia over the last few years is they don't do that anymore,
No, but I think that the size, the freaky size thing definitely should be attributed to Dorian. Dorian's the one who started the
monster look. That's the next year I want to talk about was Dorian,
Dorian started the monster look. Then you had guys like you suddenly had guys like Nasser and some body.
Yeah.
And some of the other guys, I can't even remember them offhand. You started getting these huge monsters on Gene Paul.
Folks. Yeah.
Gigantic guy. Geez, I remember the first time I saw him.
Yeah.
I think it was in Columbus at one of the Arnold shows. I was standing there backstage with Bill Graham, and this guy walks up, G. Pierre Fuchs, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I should know his name. He's a subscriber to my plug.
Oh.
Anyway, he's a great guy. He walked up, and I remember looking at him with Bill. I said, my God, who is this guy? Hey, look at the size of this guy.
Yeah.
And then he started posing right in front of me and Graham, and he had this gigantic back with muscle.
Yeah.
He had these huge calves. And, he didn't speak much English back then, but I remember saying to him, I said, you are definitely going to be Mr. Olympia very soon, I told him, and the rest, unfortunately, he didn't have some bad luck happen to the guy.
Yeah.
But, but he was, I use him as an example because, these guys are really big.
Yeah.
That's what started with the Dorian thing. Dorian,
so the first year Dorian won, he wasn't, he was about the same size, I guess, as Lee Haney. He was probably like 240 something.
You're talking about when he, that would be 90, wasn't it?
92.
Was it 92?
In Helsinki, Finland.
Oh, no, I'm talking, I thought you went the last year that Haney could be 91.
Oh, that was 91, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. He was not much bigger than Lee.
Yeah.
They could have gone either way.
And even the next year, I think from 91 to 92, he was better. He was, he had better color, better posing. He was a little more refined, but he was pretty much about the same size. I don't think he was much bigger.
I'll tell you a funny story about that 91 Olympia. Remember, he had first come on the kind of big bodybuilding scene at the Night of the Champions the year before. That's where I met Dorian Yates.
Yeah.
And he lost to Benaziza. All right, he lost to Benaziza. Another example of a smaller guy beating a bigger guy.
Yeah.
But Benaziza was another freak, huge amount of stuff. Anyway, so he shows up in 91, and I remember right after the I think it was right before the prejudging, I'm walking through the contest, the hotel lobby, and one of the IFBB judges walks up to me, or maybe not a judge, an official, he walks up to me and he says, Jerry, he says, there's going to be a new Mr. Olympia crowned tonight. I said, wait a minute, you think that somebody's going to beat Lee Haney? Because remember, Lee had already won 7 Mr. Olympia titles.
Yeah.
And to my mind, he was unbeatable.
Right.
And I said, are you talking about Yates? He says, I'm not mentioning any names. He says, but watch and see. So, when the curtain opened, sure enough, I'm looking at, Lee Haney, I'm looking at Dorian. And from the front, I'm seeing that Dorian is comparable in size, not bigger than Lee, but, not looking small by any means, but he looks considerably harder.
Yeah.
He had a harder looking physique. I mean, not that Lee looked off, but Dorian looked really like hard as rock.
Yeah.
And I said, holy shit, maybe it's, and I turned to Don Ross, who was sitting next to me. I said, hey, Don, I think Lee might lose. I said, look at this guy Yates. I said, he's hard as a rock. Don was always into muscle definite. He says, yeah, he says, I think you could be right, But then, then they started judging. I think this is the pre-judging.
Yeah.
And they turned to the back. And Dorian had a great back, don't get me wrong. But Lee had that unbelievable back. And that particular year, later on, a year or two later, Dorian's back improved more.
Yeah.
But in 91, his back wasn't as great as Haney.
Right.
And again, I turned to Don. I said, you know what? Lee's going to win it again. Look at the back comparison.
Yeah.
That's when I knew that Lee had won that year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so now with Dorian, there was a couple of years there where he could have lost, right? He won it 6 times in a row, but he had some injuries.
Oh, yeah.
The one year he tore his bicep right before the contest, and Shawn Rhoden thought could have beat him.
Well, I don't forget whether it was 96 or 97 when he was competing against Nasser El Sabah.
97, that was his last year.
97, I was standing backstage, and I was when they were doing the comparisons there, and right, they were literally like 7 feet away from me, and I'm kind of looking at it from a side angle, but I noticed that El Sabah actually literally destroyed Dorian from the side.
Yeah.
His leg bicep was like 3 times bigger than Dorian's. He had comparable calf development. And, when they turned to the back, by that time I kind of moved to the front. Yeah, sure, Dorian had a great back, but, Nasser's was good enough where it was comparable to Dorian's. And I felt because, he had that obvious, was it a bicep or tricep tear? I can't remember. Dorian I'm talking about.
Bicep. And
also his lat looked off. One of his lats looked like it had a tear. So to me, Dorian, as great as he was not at his best. And if there were points, I would have given it to Nasser about 2 points above Dorian. I would have had Nasser El Sabah win that year.
Yeah.
So
yeah. If we look back at how the judges used to judge, where symmetry was so important and, all those aspects of bodybuilding, posing, if they would have used those criteria, do you think Dorian should have won the Olympia at all?
Oh, you mean as far as symmetry and all that?
Yeah.
I think he deserved most of his wins. Not maybe the last maybe 2-3 years are open to question.
Yeah.
But the first couple of years, I think he deserved to win. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because he was in great condition. I mean, he was always in fantastic conditioning.
But I think Dorian, more than anyone, when they start talking about that incumbency factor and winning every year, even if you're off, I think his era kind of epitomized that because
absolutely. Oh yeah.
He was off a few times and should have lost, and he kept winning.
Well, how you can tell, John. You know how when they first start the contest, they bring out the bodybuilder. Remember that they have the first comparisons?
Yeah.
Most of the years that Dorian competed, when they brought out, let's say, the probable top 6 right off the bat, Dorian and all these other guys, Lee Labrada, whoever's in it, they tell them to step back, and Dorian wasn't called back again.
Yeah, right.
Until maybe much later, when he compared to a guy like Lee Labrada or Nasser, who were obviously in the top 3. But most of the time, he stood back watching. That's how you knew that he'd already kind of had the edge.
Yeah.
He was already ahead of the other guys. In the judges' points, he was already the winner.
Right. All right, what should we call the era after Dorian? Would it just be the mass monster era? I mean, Ronnie was the next era.
Yeah.
Ronnie won it 8 times.
Yeah, just really big guys. Ron Coleman.
Yeah.
You have
I mean, then it really got freaky. I mean, Dorian was freaky, but
yeah.
I mean, let's look at the weights. I mean, I think Lee Haney was pretty much in the 240s. He might have been 250, I think, for his last one.
Yeah, I saw him weigh on at the Olympia in LA in 80. Was it 88?
Yeah.
Oh, they actually weighed him on stage.
Yeah, he was like 247 or something.
Yeah, and he was the heaviest guy in the show.
By far.
He weighed 47, just like you said.
Yeah.
Some of the guys were surprising, like Rich Gaspari, who was telling everybody he weighed 220, weighed 205.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
But then when you get to Dorian now, I think he, like I said, he was like 240. And then the second year, he was 257. He was 15 pounds heavier.
Right.
And then after that, I think he went up to 270.
Right.
So, I mean, this was obviously when they had the growth hormone and the insulin coming in. And that's when you could see the size of the physique totally changed.
That's what changed the picture in bodybuilding. That's what changed the bodybuilding landscape. Those 3 drugs, the steroids, growth hormone, insulin, that's what caused these guys to balloon up to over 270 pounds. That's what did it right there.
Right.
That's the real secret. That's what.
And then then Ronnie comes in 1998. Now I remember he was around, I think he was 247 also when he won his first time in 98. And I remember 1 year later, he was 10 pounds heavier. He was 257. But I think those were the 2 best years of Ronnie's reign, was 98, 99.
Great.
And then I think in 2000, his third win, I think he was up to about 260.
Yeah.
I remember the judges were telling him, you're starting to get a little big, you're starting to get a little heavy, you know?
Yeah.
And then that 1 year he came in, he was 287, I think.
That's when he started to get the big stomach sticking out.
Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, now it's almost like they're space monsters. You know, they're like from the UFOs or something. I mean, it's just like they don't even look human anymore.
Well, in between you had Jay Cutler, who was a big guy.
Yeah, Jay Cutler was after Ronnie. Yeah,
a very thick guy. Well, you know, the interesting thing is that one guy who beat Jay Cutler was what's his name again? The guy
Dexter.
Dexter. Dexter was kind of a hybrid.
Yeah, he was a little smaller. Yeah.
I mean, when you think about it, Dexter started out, and I was surprised when I learned this. He started out like a featherweight.
Bantamweight, yeah.
Yeah, a bantamweight. When he started bodybuilding, he was a little guy.
Yeah.
He just put on size. This is a guy who best described as a kind of a hybrid.
Yeah.
He had a little man's structure, but he developed muscles big enough to win Mr. Olympia. And of course, he was very symmetrical. He had a great physique, but he was kind of like a foretelling of some of the guys that would win years later, like Brandon Curry and some of these other guys, where, or especially Shawn, what's his name? Shawn
Rhoden.
Who?
Rhoden.
Shawn Rhoden, another guy who I always called a hybrid.
Yeah.
He had that kind of more of a lift physique. I mean, big enough to win, but he didn't have that monstrous Coleman Cutler look.
Yeah.
But he still had, you know, he had such a great looking physique that I really believed. I remember commenting at the time, I said, he just set the standard. I said, thank God they're going back to a more symmetrical, better line physique that's more appealing to not just the bodybuilder, but the public. I mean, the bodybuilders liked Shawn Rhoden. They thought he was good enough. But I mean, this is the type of physique that would be more, let's say, universally appealing. And then, unfortunately, it veered right back to the mass monsters, which that's the way it is today. It's right back where you have guys like this Nick Walker. And I'm not trying to put Nick Walker down. I don't know him personally, but he's just a very massive looking physique. And some of these other guys, there's this one new guy, I wrote his name down. What's the name of that guy with the giant legs? I can't remember. Is it Rubiel Mascara?
Oh yeah, the new guy. Yeah.
This is one of the freakiest guys I've ever. What was that? Anyway, this is one of the freakiest guys I've ever seen.
Me too.
Because I've been in bodybuilding. I mean, you know, if this guy says he had 47-inch thighs, I'd believe it.
I know.
Seriously, you see the size of that guy's legs?
Yeah.
As a throwback, he's got this gigantic neck.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't see that. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, this guy's a real freak.
Yeah.
But to me, again, I mean, I don't know the man personally. He's probably a great guy, but geez, I find his physique repelling looking.
I do too. Yeah.
Oh, he's got a horrible looking. I mean, his legs are like balloons.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I mean, the symmetry is so off.
Yeah.
Guy is a textbook example of the worst symmetry you could possibly have. To me, a guy like that, as you know, even though he's definitely a mass monster, he could never win the Olympia. If I would never, he could never win the.
Yeah.
No, not against the guy with a symmetrical physique. This guy should. I have the same criticism for a couple of years with Big Ramey.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Big Ramey had the legs were just completely overdeveloped. If you remember,
Yeah.
his thighs were so overdeveloped that even though he had fairly decent calves, his calves looked like sticks
Yeah.
because his thighs were so big.
Yeah.
Finally, he started working with Chris Aceto or somebody, and they convinced him to let his, reduce his thighs a little bit. What happens? He wins the Olympia twice.
Mm-hmm.
See? So, these guys got to take a better look at themselves and realize, they need to refine their physique a little bit more if they want to win.
We skipped a couple of guys. What do you think? What do you think of Jay Cutler and Phil Heath as the Mr. Olympia champion?
Well, Jay Cutler was when he was in shape was a fantastic, completely full physique. I mean, Jay Cutler, in a way, reminds me of Larry Scott in the sense that he had bodybuilding flaws that if you took a really close look at him, like he had a really thick waist, which normally is a detriment to prefer. But because he built his shoulders were so wide and his back was so wide that you didn't even notice that he had a thick waist.
Yeah.
He had pretty good abdominals for a guy that big. He had huge legs. And he, again, another guy who was very conditioned, had a good back, great delts. He was.
Did you think his waist was too wide?
I think it was a little too wide.
Yeah.
But that, I don't think he could help. I think that was just his structure.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, do you think he was a worthy Mr. Olympia by having the wide?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he definitely, because the amount of muscle he built on the rest of his body definitely.
Plus, he was so wide. I mean, his shoulders were so wide. Even if he did have a wider waist.
Well, that's my point. You didn't even notice his wide waist because his shoulders were wide.
Right.
I mean, Vince Guarandi years ago used to tell guys, if they had a naturally wide waist, to do everything they can to try and build up the lateral delts.
Yeah. Like Larry Scott.
Yeah, exactly. That'll give the impression of a wider shoulders where it'll actually make you look like you have a smaller waist.
Right.
That was so. He was a good example of that, Jay.
What about Phil Heath?
Well, Phil Heath was a phenomenal bodybuilder. I mean, this is a guy who, when he was a basketball player, for crying out loud, he looked like he could compete in bodybuilding already. He had deltoid development. He had calves.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a guy who, if there was anyone born to be a professional bodybuilder, it's Phil Heath.
Yeah.
I would call Phil Heath. I would say probably the second most genetically gifted bodybuilder to Sergio Oliva in bodybuilding history.
Yeah, I agree.
And let me explain why I say that. It's not just his appearance. Well, it is his appearance, of course, but it's the way is that this guy does a lot of things wrong. I mean, I have nothing against Phil Heath personally, but if you look at his training videos, the way he does his exercises, if anybody trained like Phil Heath, they would look terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, in one video, he was describing his deltoid routine, shoulder routine. He did 4 kinds of front press.
Right.
He did 3 kinds of front raises.
Yeah.
They all work the front delt.
Yeah.
I mean, when you do bench presses and flies, you're getting a lot of front delt work.
Right.
I mean, if an average guy did that, he would get an overdeveloped front delt, and his side and rear delts would look like crap.
Yeah.
But Phil Heath, because of his great genetic, he gets away with it.
Yeah.
And when he did his arms, he did all these little short movements that wouldn't really produce great arms on anybody.
Yeah, incredible arms.
Phil Heath had great, fantastic arms.
Yeah, right.
I mean, he didn't. I mean, I don't think he did much for his forearms were humongous looking.
Oh, huge, yeah.
So Phil Heath, again, I think they used to call him the gift or something like that. I mean, he really was he's a genetic freak. I mean, I think he would admit it himself.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he has said that on occasion. So, he's definitely, Phil Heath's problem is a problem that's plagued a lot of other bodybuilders where they get it through their heads. In other words, they kind of have noticed how to continue to win the Mr. Olympia, you have to show the best plan is to show some improvement every year. I think I told you that Arnold's philosophy, a lot of people don't know this. Arnold had this philosophy that once you reach let's say, the pinnacle of bodybuilding, where you're at the level of a Mr. Olympia winner, you can't completely change your physique from year to year because you've already practically maximized your muscle.
Yeah.
But what you can do is look at certain muscles that maybe not be at their maximum and might improve them. Now, Arnold, for example, used the example of forearms. His forearms were a little on the weak side. He felt if he increased his forearm size enough, somehow the judges would notice it and they'd say, oh, look, Arnold's improved. He wins the Mr. Olympia again.
Yeah.
And Phil Heath, I think, knew about that or saw how the way it worked. And in his mind, to continue to win the Mr. Olympia, and he did win it 7 times, right? Was it 7 times?
Yes.
Yeah, that he needed to make some sort of improvement. Now, the way he went wrong is, the man is what, 5'7", 5'8", something like that?
5'9", I think.
All right. Yeah, he started to get to the point where he was starting to hold too much muscle. This is the same problem with Nick Walker. In other words, he has almost too much muscle for his frame.
Right.
So it makes him look like a square block.
Yeah.
It kills the symmetry. And the same goes for Phil. His symmetry was still great, don't get me wrong, but he started to get the problem as he tries to get bigger and bigger, he started to get this bloated abdomen thing.
Yeah.
And that's what finally knocked the king off the throne. He just couldn't control his abdomen.
Yeah, the abs, yeah.
That's why he lost to Shawn Rhoden.
Yeah.
Because, if you
he had it for a couple of years too. It wasn't just the year he lost to Shawn Rhoden, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
Phil, and it's interesting you mentioned that too, Jerry, because Phil was the first one where they started taking it away from. Well, actually, I think it was Jay, because Jay lost. Where they before it was, when you had Haney, when you had Ronnie, when you had Dorian, it was like they just kept going until they quit. They didn't lose until they quit, but they took it away from Jay after a couple of years.
Now, here's an interesting to think about this, that in regard to this, John. Think about it. You're into the history of bodybuilding also.
Yeah.
How many times did you see an elite champion bodybuilder with a bloated ab before, let's say, the 90s? How many times, let's say, in the 80s and 70s, Arnold State, or even way back to the 60s? How many times did you see a bodybuilder standing on stage where, in a resting state, his belly stuck out like a pregnant woman?
Except for Menser, if you believe Arnold.
Okay, yeah, well, Menser's abdomen was like that for a reason. I think we talked about the way he worked his abs. But I mean, I believe, and people would argue with this. I think the ascension of this bloated abdomen look happened to occur at the same time the bodybuilders started adding a lot of insulin and growth hormone.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's directly related because at one point, I don't remember what year it was, probably sometime during the 90s, almost everybody on the stage had a bloated abdomen. Some were worse than others. They all had bellies.
Yeah.
And when they turned to the side, it was the weirdest. You guys standing there, when they flexed their abs, they had these deep 6-pack abs.
Yeah.
And they were like, boom, their belly stuck out.
They have improved that as far as the judging goes too. I mean, I was just at a pro show this weekend, actually, in Tampa. Yeah. And there were some guys there who were huge guys with the stomachs, the stomach. Yeah. But I don't think you're going to get in the top 5 of Mr. Olympia if you got that now.
No, what happened? Well, you know what happened?
You better control it on stage, otherwise they're going to mark it.
See, what happened was it got out of hand.
It did, yeah.
I thought it were 1 or 2 guys, maybe Yates, and then after a while, you got every guy in the lineup.
Everybody, right?
The belly.
They weren't even marking guys down for it.
No, they weren't marking there. And then Arnold, in an interview, talks about how stupid the bloated belly looks, and that's when they started to crack down on it.
Yeah.
And they were threatening they were going to take points off.
Yeah.
But a lot of the guys, this is really the ironic part. You'll notice that when guys, even with the bloated bellies, when they flexed, their bellies disappeared. They got a flat abdominal look.
Yeah.
Somebody must have taken the bodybuilder inside, maybe one of their coaches or whoever, who was more aware, and said, "Listen, guy, when you're standing there and not being judged, don't keep your abs semi-flexed. Yeah. Don't relax your abs. It's just like back in the days when I was competing, a lot of the guys, when they're standing in the lineup, would relax their legs and their legs would look smooth.
Yeah.
Vince the Garanda is the one who taught me. He says, when you're standing there, keep your legs slightly flexed so they look more muscular than the other guys, and it'll give you an edge. And I did all the contests I competed in. So somebody, I believe, got to these guys, because as you say, they probably, some of the guys still have bloated bellies.
Oh, yeah, they do, for sure.
And John, it's unavoidable. If you're taking those drugs, it's going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it. Other than
everybody's taking those drugs.
That's what I'm saying. So the only way to avoid it is to stand there with your abs. I mean, you don't have to flex them really hard. But you got to like try and do a semi-vacuum if you can. Most of these guys can't do a vacuum, but if you do a semi-vacuum and keep your abs slightly flexed, then it gives the impression that their bellies aren't bloated. I think,
but a lot of them can do vacuums now. Like Derek Lunsford can do that. Hottie,
it's kind of coming back. Well, all the classic bodybuilding, that's like a standard pose for them.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, this guy who won, what's his name? The guy who's won 6 years in a row. Bumstead. That's one of his main poses. He does
vacuum,
so that's common in that. So it's kind of coming back. It's kind of the anti-bloat look.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
The idea is that if you can do a vacuum, then you probably don't have a bloated belly. You know what I mean?
Right.
A mute way of saying, "Look at me, I don't have a bloated belly. I can do a vacuum." You know?
Yeah.
So it's coming back. You know.
So I mean, this is a kind of a hard question to answer, but if we look at the 60 years of the Mr. Olympia, Jerry, what's your overall thoughts? You know.
Well, it goes. It's like things being in style.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like clothes. I mean, for a couple of years, I'll go way back in time for this one. Like in '70s, a lot of people were wearing what they call bell-bottom pants.
Yeah, bell-bottom
right?
pants. Yeah.
You know, or then later on it was skinny jeans, all this kind of stuff. And then they go out of style, you know, and then you might get completely different. And then a couple of years later, what happens? The bell-bottom jeans suddenly
right.
And that's the way kind of bodybuilding contests have been over the decades. You have these big guys, and then it starts to slip towards where you have more symmetrical cut guys like Samir and Chris. And then it starts to slip back with Dorian into size. And, you know, and so where it ends, I don't know. You know, all I know is that I personally, I've mentioned this in past podcasts with you, I have a little misgivings about the current state of pro bodybuilding because the emphasis is on so much size now.
Yeah.
And I know what these guys do to get that size. Yes, they train hard. Yes, they do good nutrition, but it's not. Let's put the cards on the table and not be deceitful. A lot of it's the drugs.
Yeah.
You know, these guys taking more and more drugs. I've come across a lot of studies recently about some of the effects of drugs, particularly one called Trenbolone. I just did an article in my Applied Metabolics about and the effects of Trenbolone shocked even me. These guys have no idea what they're in for if they keep using this stuff. I don't even want to say it out loud, but I just hope these guys fare well in the future because they're doing a lot of things now that can only be called suicidal to get ready for shows. And I would personally, because of that, I'd like to see a regression, if you want to call it that, back to maybe a Shawn Rhoden type of physique, where meaning you're big, and symmetrical, but you're not bloated out, and you look like your muscle fits your body structure.
Yeah.
That's the way I think a Mr. Olympia should look.
What's your favorite era of the Mr. Olympia over the 60-year span?
A
certain time period.
I would have to be the Arnold years.
The Arnold years, okay.
Even though it was the Olympia was sparsely populated, as you point out.
Yeah.
There was something. I mean, it was kind of exciting, you know, to get the magazines and see all the photos of Arnold, all the other guys, and Arnold, and you know the fact that I saw him every day in the gym and stuff.
Yeah.
It added an extra dimension to me that I actually knew the guys personally. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, like today, you know, I don't know any of the guys. The only guys who know me are guys who competed in the '90s. Dorian and those guys. The new guys wouldn't know me from Adam.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like the old days when I used to go to all the major contests. You know, so I personally, if for no other reason than health reasons, I'd like to see bodybuilding kind of go back a little bit to the not necessarily the Samir Chris look, but at least the Shawn Rhoden look. You know what I mean? Where
I agree.
have I guess the word I would use, a more plausible physique.
Yeah.
Rather than complete freak physique. But, I know my words are going to fall on deaf ears because as Wayne DeMilia pointed out to me, the hardcore bodybuilding fans want to see freaks. He's right. He's right. They love guys like Nick Walker.
Yeah.
It's very exciting to see a monster like that come out on stage. Because one of the reasons is they know they can never look like Nick Walker.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people that watch Nick Walker compete, or even Dorian, they're looking at this guy. I know I could never live, but it's almost like looking at the comic books.
Yeah.
People love Superman. They know they're not going to, be able to leap over a tall building in one leap or fly through the sky.
Yeah.
But they still love the fantasy of Superman, and they like to see a guy like Nick Walker. They enjoy the fantasy of thinking, gee, imagine if I were that big.
Yeah.
So they kind of, it's like when we were kids, I'm sure you went through this, going to the contest, you see, they say, wow, I want to look like that guy.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of the mental.
I don't know if the fans today want to look like those guys. I think they just.
Oh, no.
They appreciate it, but I don't think they want to look like them.
No, you're right. No, they don't want to look like, because they can't, they know they can't look like him.
But I think they wanted to look like Arnold. They wanted to look like Larry Scott. They wanted to look like Frank Zane.
Well, that's one of the attractions of people like Frank Zane, because it's a completely attainable physique.
Even a guy like Arnold was bigger. I think a lot of people wanted to look like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But today it's more of a curiosity thing than anything else. In other words, the freakish look, it's like a fantasy thing. It's kind of like you want to, the fans want to see just how big these guys can get.
Yeah.
They get turned on by that.
Yeah.
But it's not good for the bodybuilders themselves, because they're putting themselves at great risk.
Right.
I know if I said any of this to them in person, they'd say, hey, Jerry, go fuck off,
Yeah, they're not going to listen.
They wouldn't care. They want to win. You got a mentality where, like, you remember that famous statement years ago, was it Tom Platz, where he said, if you won the Mr. Olympia and dropped dead 2 days later, you'd be happy.
Yeah.
That's the mentality of these guys. You can't get through to them. It's not going to work until it actually happens. Then it's too late.
I think my favorite era was the 80s, because I think the physiques were more advanced then, and I think the posing was better. And I think that's when they were posing more to music in the 80s. And then they weren't freaky big, like, like you said, at 88, you had Gaspari at 205. I mean, he was big, but he wasn't like a freak,
Oh, you had you have people like Bob Paris, Rory Lederman.
They almost looked like superheroes back then. I think they were like
they look like, and they just had, the only word I could think of is beautiful. They had literally beautiful physique.
I think a lot of those guys back then, they kind of remind me of like our version of movie stars. They were they were so good looking, and their physiques were so good, and they posed so they were like works of art up there. And it was more advanced, I think, than the 70s physique. Like, of course, Arnold was the greatest, but I think most of those guys in the 70s weren't as completely developed.
Right.
I think the physiques were much better in the 80s, but it hadn't gone too far yet. I think in the 90s, a lot of people say the 90s were the best era because the guys were big. And I mean, you had Levrone, you had Flex, you had Dorian, you had, some really, really incredible physiques. But I think they were getting, it was too much, I think. To me, I think they were getting too big. They were getting like beyond like human size,
I totally agree. I didn't think it through, but I now have to change my opinion. You're right. I would say the 80s were the best era.
Yeah.
Reason you said, they had so many great looking physiques that didn't have a freaky look, but had just a fantastic, symmetrical, beautiful appearance. These guys that I don't think would turn off anybody, not even somebody into bodybuilding.
Right.
In fact, I've been at contests back then. I remember I was at the show where Bob Paris won the Nationals. What was that, 81? I can't remember. 83. I was there, and I heard the comments of people watching the show.
Yeah.
And some of them were obviously not bodybuilders. I heard women, I didn't know these people. They were looking at Bob Paris, and I heard them say, who is that guy?
Yeah.
And the guy who was with him obviously knew who Bob was, a bodybuilding fan.
Yeah.
He'd say, oh, that's Bob Paris. He's probably going to win. And the woman would say something like, gee, he's such a good look. Gee, I love the way he looks.
Jerry, I remember going to shows, local shows in Chicago in the 80s, and you would always see groups of girls, women, like 4 or 5 girls, and they would go to the bodybuilding shows to see the men because the men were so attractive to them. You know,
Right.
they liked that muscular, but they weren't too big. They weren't freaky. They were
Right.
good-looking guys with muscles.
Yeah.
And it was almost like them going out to the strip show that night. You know, they went to the male strip show because they could see these guys and see their bodies, and that's how they thought of bodybuilders back then. They were attractive.
I saw a couple of those kind of women at some of the major shows that I used to cover for Joe. You know, the Arnold show.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
Olympics, I'd see women show up by themselves at the show, and you know, it's obvious they really wanted to see. You know, they were turned on by these guys' physiques.
yeah, yeah.
They, you know, again, that was before the days of the giant freaks. I don't think that most women would like that type of physique at
No,
all.
I don't think so either.
You know, so it's kind of like if you reverse it, it's kind of like the way bodybuilders look at gigantic female bodybuilders. You know, it's like my feeling is that as a male, I can appreciate the amount of muscle they put on and the amount of muscle definition, but you know, I'm not at least bit attracted to them in a sexual way, not at all.
Right,
Not,
right.
not. I mean, I don't mean to be. I hope women don't get mad at me saying this, but you know, you can't control the way your brain works. You're only attracted to certain types.
Right,
And
right.
a woman has to express a certain degree of femininity,
Yeah,
otherwise, I'm just not turned on. You know,
yeah,
so
yeah.
that's the way it works.
All right, Jared. Well, thank you for joining me for the last couple hours to talk about the 60 years of the Mr. Olympia. We tried to cover it as best as we could.
Yeah,
I think we gave a good overview of it.
yeah.
So
I think
this year they'll be celebrating the 60th, not the 60th anniversary, but the 60th Mr. Olympia contest.
wow, time flies. Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, are you going to go to the show, John? At the
Yeah, I'm
Olympia?
planning on it. Yeah, I'm planning on going this year.
Is it in Florida this time?
No, it's in Vegas.
Oh, it's back in Vegas?
Yeah.
See, I don't even keep up. I don't even know where it is.
It's
Wow.
at a new hotel called the Resorts World.
Yeah.
Supposed to be really nice, and it's going to be there, I think, for quite a while. I think they signed a multi-year contract. So
I like it in Vegas, though. You know.
yeah, more exciting. Yeah.
I mean, you think the Lunsford has a? You think he has a good chance of?
I think he has a real good chance. Yeah, I just saw him last night at this Tampa show, and he's huge. He's really huge.
So he's actually put on more size.
More size, yeah, much more size. Yeah,
So all he has to do is harden it up. You know.
yeah, yeah,
And he'll probably win again. But Heidi's also gotten a little bit bigger. I saw a recent.
yeah. And he's very hard. So
Geez, that's going to be a pretty good show. You know, a couple of
yeah,
guys,
yeah,
a couple of new guys too. You know, that we'll see what happens.
yeah. We'll see what happens. We'll talk about it for sure.
I think it'll probably be a pretty competitive show,
I think it's very good. Yeah,
unless Lunsford looks so freakish that he you know turns into one of those things where you know they ask him to step back and jump
yeah,
over.
right, right. No, I think it's going to be very, very tight.
Won't know till it happens.
Yeah.
All right, John.
All right, Jared. Well, thank you again for joining me on the show. It's always a pleasure having you on. And Applied Metabolics, of course, is your newsletter. I'll put the link below if anyone wants to subscribe. It's only $10 a month.
Right.
And I appreciate you coming on again, Jared.
Okay, John. Take care, and we'll be talking again, I'm sure.
Okay, sounds good. Take care, Jared. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.